Matthew Elliott, not a public figure in terms of being an MP or anything like that, but an absolutely central character in the Vote Leave campaign of 12 months ago. Really interesting guy, big brain guy, very thoughtful. Came in and had a chat. He works at the Legatum Institute now, which is a think tank based at Westminster. He's a senior fellow of that organisation. So I started by asking him, given that we're all about Brexit on this podcast, what he thinks really about where we are right now. Would he have thought that we would be where we are right now in terms of the negotiations and the feeling as we approach all things Brexit 12 months on from the referendum? Here's what he had to say.
I'm pretty happy with where we are now, and I think the government's done a pretty good job. There's some people right after the referendum saying that we should invoke Article 50 right away and get straight to the negotiating table. I actually think it was good that they had that pause and waited to set up the two key Brexit departments, David Davis's and Liam Fox's, and also to work out the precise negotiating strategy in the white paper from the Lancaster House speech. So they took their time, they got all their ducks in the row, and I think now they're down to the negotiations. That's a good position to be in, rather than rushing into things.
What do you say to those people, and there are millions of them, aren't there, who voted the other way from the side that you were advocating, who are just worried, who are just panicked, who think, is this going to be a good thing?
I think that, I think it will be a good thing, but I think we need to make sure we keep on selling that vision about why we voted for Brexit. And I think that we should look back to the Lancaster House speech that the Prime Minister made, where I think she painted quite a positive, optimistic, internationalist vision of Britain after leaving the EU. And she stressed about how we'd continue to be a good neighbour to the rest of the EU, to continue cooperating with other EU member states on security and defence and extradition and the environment and things like that. And I would like to go back to some of that language. So I think the trouble with the general election campaign is everything becomes very black and white. So everything was about, no deal is better than a bad deal. And that was the only soundbite we heard. Yeah. And I think I'm pleased.
Week after week. Yeah.
I know the government's moving back to some of that sort of sunny uplands, positive vision stuff, which I think is what will reassure people on the Remain side that this is a step which will be positive for the country.
The other day I was having a read of Dominic Cummings' blog, which is a feast of intellectual wanderlust that my limited brain power sometimes struggles to keep up with. But he was talking about, and I don't have the exact quotes in front of me, but he was talking about at one stage the scale of the challenge of securing a successful negotiation. And I think he compared it to the Apollo landings and was questioning whether or not the infrastructure, if you like, that the British government's assembled to conduct this negotiation is as good as it could be. I don't know if you've read said musings, but I just wondered what would you make of what he was saying?
I have read of some of those comments, and I actually have more confidence in what the government's been doing than Dominic clearly has. And I actually think that the time we put into setting up the Department for Exiting the EU and the Department of International Trade has been very well spent. And actually the feedback that I'm getting from both the civil servants on the British side and the civil servants from the European Commission side of things is that actually at that, paper shuffler level, if you like, things are actually going well and actually getting rid of some of the knotty problems that are being faced by both sides. So I actually think that we are still on track. I think we could still have a deal by September of next year, which basically then leaves 3 or 4 months for the member state parliaments to agree that deal and for Britain to leave in time for the next European elections, which of course are in 2019.
There's quite a lot of chat, wasn't there, the other day about some tweets from Dominic, and clearly you're here to speak for yourself and Dominic isn't here, but I was intrigued by one of the things that was picked up on unsurprisingly by ardent Remainers was this suggestion from Dominic Cummings, which you might argue is a statement of the bleeding obvious, but where he was suggesting that there are outcomes as a result of this Brexit negotiation that might not be good to the UK, whilst he hoped and expected that there would be a good outcome, that it would be worthwhile. Maybe we're back in that old thing of occasionally all discussions being looked at through the prism of Leave and Remain, even though the referendum is over a year back. What do you make of that observation from him? Was it a statement of the obvious to you? And what do you make of the reaction it's provoked?
Well, I think during a campaign, everything gets reduced to black and white. So if you're on the Remain side, you're always sort of forced into a situation where you've got to defend everything that the European Union does and saying it's all brilliant and we should stay as part of it. Whereas, of course, the world is more nuanced and more black and white. And I mean, I use slightly different language to Dominic when I explain it. I think we need to be going for an open Brexit rather than a closed Brexit. And
what does that mean for you?
What I mean is, I think the white paper basically agrees with this. If you go for an open Brexit, where you go for Britain as a free trading nation, trade deals right across the world, getting the trade deal with the EU, being open for business, trying to attract investment and businesses from across the world, that's the best form of Brexit. Whereas, of course, if you went down the route of having a closed Brexit, where you become a very insular country and very protectionist and pulling up the drawbridge and being very close to the outside world, that wouldn't be a good form of Brexit. And I would actually say that'd be worse than being in the European Union. So for me, the approach the government's taking of the open Brexit is the right path. And I think we are on the path to a good Brexit.
It's funny that, isn't it? And again, it shows the challenge really in the politics after any referendum, because any referendum by definition is binary, and any winning or indeed losing side in a binary referendum has to assemble a very broad coalition that is willing to hang under a particular flag, but will on a million other issues have very disparate range of views. And it's interesting your definition of an open and closed Brexit, because there'll be a good number of people who voted for Brexit who would want the opposite version of the Brexit from the one you're advocating.
Well, thankfully speaking, there are very few protectionists, I think, in the UK. So I think most people are quite sort of free trading by their nature because of our history. And actually, when it comes to migration as well, which is the other key area of this, I actually think the British public's attitudes are more nuanced than what some commentators and politicians often think, in the sense that we did plenty of focus groups up and down the country in places like Sunderland, where we got a great victory early in the night.
That was the big moment,
wasn't it? Just
after midnight. I remember that. Yeah.
And even there, people will say, yes, of course we want to have highly skilled migrants coming to the UK, and yes, of course we need some seasonal workers to pick fruit and vegetables in the farms. So people are actually more nuanced on migration than I think some people appreciate.
Just end, Matthew, if I may, with a little insight into the way that BBC news gathering operations work. The other day, my colleague Ron Brown was loitering in Downing Street doing his job. I think he was waiting for cabinet ministers to come and go, and that whole business. And you'll be familiar with this from the telly news of people shouting ludicrous questions at ministers and all the rest of it. Ron reckoned he spotted you going up Downing Street. Now I don't know. Maybe you were just taking a shortcut on the way for your morning milk. I have no idea. Did you have an appointment in Downing Street the other day?
I did, funny enough. Ooh. And one thing the Number 10 has been good at is actually in terms of the outreach to the business community. And, of course, being the founder of Business for Britain, they're keen to hear from both people from the CBI and IOD and groups like that, but also actually know what people from the sort of Business for Britain side of things are thinking. So to be put in touch with people like Lord Anthony Bamford from JCB and Sir James Dyson. And there are many other business leaders. We had, I think, 1,500 by the end of the campaign. So they wanted to actually know what they were thinking about Brexit at the moment.
So did you see the PM?
I didn't see the PM, no.
And you weren't offered a job or anything? We hear there's jobs going, director communications and all the rest of it. They weren't offering you jobs, were they?
There was no job offered, no.
Were they seeking your advice? I mean, what was the exchange, and can you tell us who you were speaking to?
You're digging very hard now. I was speaking to Jimmy McLaughlin, who's head of business. I didn't
think you were going to answer my question, so I admire you for doing so.
I was speaking to him. I hope it's fine to say that. And of course, there's a meeting.
And who's he? Sorry, excuse me.
He's the head of business liaison for Number 10, so part of the external relations unit. And he was just sounding me out about what I thought about Brexit and what some of the business supporters of Business of Britain were thinking about what's going on. But of course, at the same time, there's a big meeting on Friday, which David Davis is hosting, which will have representatives of the CBI and the IOD there. They're getting this range of opinion in, and that's a good thing, because I think that, post the election, one of the messages that came out is to make sure that, it is, a business-friendly Brexit that's good for the British economy. So I'm pleased the government's listening to what business leaders are thinking.